The basic strokes are really awesome because they combine to make all of the lowercase letters. So if you're going to spend any time practicing, you should practice the basic strokes if you can. What I want to share today is just a few of the most common struggles that I see with these basic strokes. For the first stroke, the upstroke, the main problem is shakiness. And I'm going to give you just 4 tips for what you can do to help with that. The first one is to just make sure that your pen is at a 45-degree angle. Sometimes if your pen gets too high up, that can cause some shakiness as you're moving your hand. The other thing that can cause a lot of shakiness is just moving too fast or too slow. So you kind of have to find your sweet spot speed. What feels good for you. Generally calligraphy is a little bit slower. So if you find like you're moving really slow because you're just trying to get it perfect, it's going to come out a little bit more shaky than if you go a little bit quicker. And the last reason why sometimes our upstrokes are shaky is because you're trying to go too thin. So if you're trying to get a super tiny, thin line, then sometimes that can end up being a little shaky. And the important thing to remember is, yes, you want your upstrokes to be thin, but as long as they're thinner than the downstroke, then it's perfect. It doesn't need to be as thin as this line here. For the downstroke, the main issue that I see for beginners is that they're not using enough pressure. They do something more like this. And if you do an upstroke next to it, that's really similar. So you're not going to hurt your pen by pressing down and giving a lot of pressure. You want that to be wide and a nice thick line. And the other thing that you'll notice with these brush pens is that this portion right here is going to be at an angle. Some people think that it should be like a straight edge on the top, but that's not really how it works with this tool. It's going to be at an angle on the top and the bottom, and that's just normal. The other problem that a lot of people struggle with is transitioning from a thick line to a thin line. So in both of these examples, or also you have a transition in the compound curve, you have a transition in the O form, in the ascending loop, and the descending loop. So in all of these, you're having these transitions where you're changing from a thick line to the thin line. And the thing to remember with all of these is just to know when to start transitioning. So for the overturn, it's right about here to this point. That is your transition area. And so at this point, you're just doing a nice thin line, then you're transitioning. Once you get to here, it's going to be a nice thick line. It's the same thing here. This is the transition area, and I'm just going to mark it on all of them. And so those are just areas where you're going to want to kind of slow down and just think about how much pressure you're putting on your pen. So all these little spots are the transition areas. Something that can happen a lot, this happens with an O form. I'm going to try to, yeah, that one's good. Replicate it because it's what you don't want. So sometimes as you're drawing, you're going to notice you're going to get this a lot of heaviness on the bottom of these strokes. How they should be is more like this. There. So see, there should be no thickness on the bottom. It should be thin at that point. But if you look at these examples, it's really thick, and that's called a soggy bottom. Do not want those. How you can avoid them is to slow down. So these are caused by moving too fast as you're transitioning out of the thick to the thin line. And so to avoid it, all you have to do is just slow down a little bit. And then that will help reduce those soggy bottoms. Okay, those are the main tips that I have on the basic strokes. And again, I would encourage you to practice these as much as you can. It's really going to help you get those lowercase letters down and help you as we make our Valentine garland. But let me know if you guys have any questions about any of the strokes, if you want to see examples or need help with any of them.